I was learning about you, I was very impressed because you have this kind of what we call hybrid profiles. You have been an entrepreneur yourself, you have created your own consultancy company, you have been working for public institutions like the Energy Commission, giving advice about digitalization.
European Commission, not the Energy Commission.
Yes, sorry.
I know, it's a lot about energy. But
European Commission. And you have been working also in companies like Booz and Hamilton. So today, you are the special envoy for Startup Delta. So what is your role? What is a Startup Delta?
So it was originally an initiative by the government to tell more about what's going on in the Netherlands about entrepreneurship, startups, innovation, all that. And then my boss, Nelly Kroes, was the first to take that job. And she said, we don't want just to go around the world and tell the story. I want to actually have some influence on policy. So she then she took on this challenge for 1.5 years. She went around and pushed and pulled, and I was asked to succeed her in that. And which basically what we do, we looked at the whole chain of basically from starting a startup, even before it's talent development to exit, and we looked at where in the Netherlands there were gaps, and try to find those parties that we could work with to address those gaps. So this could be in access to capital, to talent, to networks, technologies, markets. In all of these places you'll find that there are things you can do better. Mm-hmm. And there are places where things are going better and where you can learn from. And and it's also connecting parties. The Netherlands has many innovation hubs, but it's a small country in a sense. And everybody wants to do their own little thing. And sometimes it's good to see, to kind of overreach a bit and build bridges, so to see that we can do something at a bit more scale.
Mm-hmm. And what is your motivation to work with the startups? Because typically, or to be able to foster the entrepreneurship world, because usually it's a topic that not many people pay attention to it, especially from...
Oh, I mean, people say it's a hype here, so that's good to hear. No, I think what... my interest comes from the time with Nelly Kroes when we were doing the digital agenda. We were looking at telling the story about digital, and the digital was going to change everything. And it was not a vertical like you have energy and you have transportation and you have telecoms basically, or IT. He said digital is going to be transversal, it's going to impact society. So you have societal questions, you've got ethical questions, you've got economic questions, you've got business questions, etc. But it was very difficult to sell the story because we were just basically put away as a vertical. And there were other things. Our people were investing a lot in research funds into things like software. And why? Because we didn't have a Facebook or we didn't have a Google. So he said, well, is that really? Are we going to get a Google if we spend 40 million a year through the European Commission on research funds in software? Probably not. So why don't we go and look at where the innovation is actually happening? Because we need innovators to tell the story, and those innovations are happening in healthcare, they can happen in education system. Everywhere you find people that through digital technologies were doing innovations, but were hitting the wall because of the institutions and all of the legacy systems that are there. So we wanted those people to connect with those people, and the startups are actually driving a lot of the technology to the market. And the startups were developing when we had obviously Skype, we had Rovio, we had Spotify, so we had a few kind of bright lights. And what we got back from the whole startup ecosystem was that they didn't really need European money so much, but they needed role models, they needed the politicians to understand, the policymakers, that this was an important development. And so we set up a program with Nelly to go really across Europe, from pioneers to TechCrunch to Campus Party, and went to all of those places where many of the innovators and startups were gathering. And what I really liked about it is that these were the people that were always looking to make something happen. Whereas if you're in politics and or in policy making, especially at the European level, there are many parties who will try to make sure that nothing happens. And this is not. This is just because everybody has their own industry. You have the legacy industry, like the telcos, or you have. And if you want to change something, obviously there are many more people that do not want to change than the ones that do want to change. So it was very refreshing to be working with people that were only focusing on change and creating something instead of basically just focusing on process and continuity and all that.
It's refreshing, this perspective, in the sense that usually when we are talking about the European Commission of public funding, we just are asking for money, or the entrepreneurs are there, okay, just give me money. So what is, in your opinion, then the role that these organizations, the European Commission and other politicians should play in really to foster entrepreneurship in Europe?
Well, many people came to Brussels, they always want to meet Nelly, because she was like the change agent, and they want to talk to her, and they present their brilliant business models or innovations or whatsoever. So I was then the kind of the gatekeeper a bit. And I often had a telephone conversation before, said, well, why do you want to come? What is it you want to get here? And very often it was just telling the story, because nobody understood their brilliance or whatever. And then there was another category, it said, we come for money. I said, are you really sure you want this kind of money? Because this money comes with a big and heavy tag of bureaucracy and conditionality and all that. And many didn't understand that fully. And I think the Commission has moved up a lot already and have simplified, and we're now working with the European Innovation Council preparation work to simplify even further and to make sure that we flip it a bit, that we don't look at giving money from the institutional side, but look at it what the entrepreneur needs actually. And the entrepreneur has different funding needs across the lifetime of his or her business. And the Commission and European money is only one part of that. And the public money and private money, how they mix and how they actually leverage each other is really important. And there was not enough eye for that. So I think what Europe can do is, like you're doing here, is looking much more of how you can support innovation, but through market mechanisms, so not so much through programs. I think it's very difficult to kind of push technology. You can push it as far as you want. You can do after prototypes. You can go even further. You can give it money. But at a certain point, the demand side has to come in, and that's probably better early than later. Yes. Whereas we love our technologies and we love the potential, because it's like everybody is a very talented singer until you try to make a business out of it. And this is a lot with inventions too. We see the incredible potential for some transformational technology, but actually how to get it in the market, how do people actually start paying money for it, and how it actually can have its transformational impact. That requires some other steps where especially policymakers are not very good at. So you have to acknowledge that and have to make sure that much earlier in the process you start thinking about what the market is, what your market size is, which markets you're servicing, how you're servicing it. Are you going to serve it, or are somebody else going to serve it based on a license? All of these kind of questions.
It's interesting because here we have some of our startups that we have been helping to them. And I was commenting you before that 99% of them, when they come to us, when they say, what do you want? What do you need? They said, 99% they said, money.
Yeah, or leave us alone.
Yeah, and what for? And then the answer is then much more blurred. And many of them, they say, to go on working on my lab, creating the technology and so on. And then what we say is that, okay, no, it's fine that you have to develop your product, but first, before putting a penny on the technology or go on putting money on your product, go outside. Go outside the lab. Go outside your office. And try to identify the real customers, the one that they are going to pay for your solution. Take a coffee with them, smell them, even taste them. Taste them if it is possible.
I don't know about that. I don't want every researcher trying to taste their customers. But well, maybe it works for you.
In a metaphorical way.
Okay.
Because then they can come back to the lab and really create the solution that they know that there is a need outside there.
Yeah, I think not every researcher has to be a business person. No. And I think there are very few researchers that are good business people. And so you can also look at maybe how the outside world, the entrepreneur, with a seasoned entrepreneur, can actually look at the technology and see, well, how to develop a market for that, or how to find the market, and maybe pivot a bit so that you get a product that actually serves that market share. And I think this is a very difficult conversation we're also having in this country, because if you talk about commercialization of knowledge, people immediately are frightened. They say, well, now we all have to start doing business, or it's going to take away research budget or education budget, and I don't think that's really the case. So I think researchers should be able to excel in research if they want to, but we should be more aware that if technologies emerge, that even before they are maybe fully developed from the technologist's point of view, you get people to look at it with a market perspective and see what kind of real world problem could this technology actually solve in a way that it's affordable and that it's fundable as well. And that's something you can organize. I mean, that like an organization like yours can really is well positioned to organize around that.
We try. Talking about the market and also about the role of the government, don't you think also that they could be the launching customers of many of these innovations, just to show, to give confidence to the rest of society, hey, it works, we have done it?
Well, yes, I mean, you'd hope so. And I think there's much more opportunity to do that than actually is being used today. We kind of hide behind public procurement rules and we say Brussels, but it's actually not true. You can organize it in a way. You can do these SBIRs, so which allow you to experiment, to get to procure innovations, and actually the innovator that has been developing kind of this good idea can actually also participate in the procurement, in the real public procurement track. And I think in the way we traditionally procure, there's a lot of cause for concern, because we have defined mostly not only the objective or the target, but we define every single step of the methodology you use, maybe the technology, and the people that are procuring don't really know this. They don't even know what's out there. So if you want to get innovations more into the public domain, if you want to be able to do what you're suggesting, then it also requires a different kind of procurer, or at least the awareness from the people that do the politics of this, that the procurer might feel very uneasy about taking that risk, because the current risk is very well defined. In procurement, you can make a billion euro miscalculation on a train investment or a big bridge. People don't care. But if you are a politician and you make a little mistake with a wrong declaration, you're out of your job. So I mean, just to say that these kind of risks, even though they're very big, but are very well defined and they are attributed. If now suddenly the procurer starts becomes innovative and does something very nice and fancy, but it politically isn't well reflected, or something goes wrong, is not covered, obviously he or she will never do that. So you have to create an environment in which that experimentation is possible, and that's something the politics or the policymakers need to endorse, and then procurers can actually do their thing, which is procuring more innovative solutions and working more closely with startups or with innovators to deliver more innovative public services.
So some ideas for our colleagues coming from the public institutions. What is special? I mean, you're trying to foster all this entrepreneurial ecosystem. Here in the Netherlands, I mean, it's really a great place to start up. I mean, because it's one of the countries that it is at the top in terms of innovation hubs, entrepreneurial mindset. So what it is so special about the Netherlands?
Well, that's a very good question, and I don't have the answer. I mean, you could go back into history in the sense we were always a bit different. So we were a republic. It was a good experiment. Didn't last that long. It was then actually we were never a monarchy until the French came and bestowed it upon us. So our first king in the Netherlands was a Frenchman, and then the rest of Europe decided that was a good idea. So then we had a monarchy in the Netherlands. So we live under sea level for a part. So you had to, and it's actually part why we were so democratic at the time, because you can defend the former the feudal state model. Is very good against defending against a foreign invader, but against water, you can't really use cannons against water. So you have to have some kind of democratic system where actually engineers and civil servants were the ones that were mostly in charge. So we had very early on also decentralized tax system to support basically our dikes and our waterworks. So I think there's always been something in the Netherlands which has been very anti-establishment or anti-authority, and always questioning why, and that is helpful for innovation. You don't take yes or no for an answer. You always ask why, and isn't there a different way to do things? So that might be the kind of cultural DNA. And then for the rest, and I don't say everything is perfect here. I mean, we have also a bit of an island mentality. Everybody has their little units, and wants to be great in their little unit. And sometimes you think, think a bit bigger, and it's beyond just your little town or your province. So there's a lot of scope for improvement. But where I think we are good at is flexibility, quite pragmatic. Our government is, on the whole, I think, very open to innovation and pragmatic as well, even though we have all of the same procedures and bureaucracy and all that. But there will always be someone who says, I'll try to help you and try to create to create space for you to do your innovation. So I think the innovation is very much with the people, and I wouldn't say that we typically have the innovation system like a country like Israel, for instance, that really has a whole system which is lined up to support startups and innovation. That I think we don't have yet. I would desire for that. I would definitely want some more. But if you look for what the magic sauce in the Netherlands is, it's, I think, in the people.
Now, moving forward into Europe, because we have a huge challenge here about creating a real entrepreneurial ecosystem. You know the States very well, and usually I have the impression that this English saying that the grass is always greener on the other side, and we are always saying, yes, we are good, but they are much better, the culture of entrepreneurship in US. Is it a reality, or are we so far away from the US in terms of entrepreneurship?
Well, first, I think you're right to say we kind of overhyped the US. US is not Silicon Valley. So you have Silicon Valley, you have Seattle, you got Austin and Boston and New York, and then maybe for medtech you have North Carolina, and so you basically have what we have here too. You have different hubs where innovation is happening. Silicon Valley is beyond many of the other ecosystems, but it's not as such created. A lot of military money went in, and now you have some really brilliant companies, and then you have a whole ecosystem with the money being replowed back into entrepreneurship. But if you look at public services, if you don't want to copy Silicon Valley when it comes to housing or healthcare or a lot of the public services. Basically, it's unlivable. People, if they don't have a double income, you just cannot live there. So I think there's a lot to be said about other places as well. But I think in Europe, I mean, we just need to get our act together. I think we are always looking at process, and we're not looking at outcomes. And we always tell why everything is difficult instead of seeing where the opportunity is. And what I think is very refreshing from the US is that they're very enthusiastic about achieving something, and they're doing it at a very high ambition level. And I think that is and the way also to develop your idea, to pitch your idea, to dare to think big, is something that we in Europe feel a bit embarrassed about. We think it's a bit convoluted and better to be a bit more understated. But that also affects your mindset. So I had a very good example. A young entrepreneur here in the Netherlands. He was 17, I think, when he designed a way to clean up the plastic in the oceans, which is a huge challenge. And he designed it, and he won a prize, and then he developed it further. And then he went to the US for funding because he couldn't get much funding here. And then finally he got funding from Peter Thiel, from Mark Benioff, and some really serious money. And he went to the US and told his story. He said, I'm going to clean up the ocean's plastic. And one of the investors there said, I understand where you're going, but you're not crazy enough. Well, that could never happen in Europe. People will all say, you're crazy. It's not going to work because of X, Y, and Z. And basically, you go around and people will declare you crazy, and it will not work because everybody said you're crazy. There's someone who says, you're not crazy enough. You should aim higher. And it's incredible what he has been able to achieve in a few years. And he will actually deliver. And it's going to be an amazing story, I'm convinced. This is not unique. This is just someone with a drive who finding some people that believe in him and finding the do good collaborations with university, good collaboration with government, but also with private capital, making that work. Also very good collaboration with the Delft University, so you have students actually also involved, so he gets the best brains. And he's now 23, and he's going to rid our oceans of plastic.
Fantastic. Indeed, this is a bit what I call the lawyer syndrome. When you are in a company, say, I want to do that, and then the lawyer comes and says, no, you cannot do it because of this, you cannot do it because of that, you cannot do it because of that, but there is nobody, he doesn't offer you the possibility, okay, no. But go on that direction.
Well, Amazon has a very good answer to that. If you come to a meeting, then you have to, and you have a proposal, you have to prepare a note. So 4 to 6 pages, and the note should describe and argue very rigorously about what you want to do. Nobody's allowed to see the note before, no PowerPoint presentation. Everybody has the same information. So you process the information, and then you have the meeting. At the meeting, people can say, I don't like this, it's not going to work. But if you say that, you have to produce a note why it's not going to work. So in principle, it is yes, we will do this. But if there are really good arguments not to do it, those arguments can actually prevail. But in a normal meeting, if you come up with a good idea and the argument of someone that why it won't work will always prevail. So you can actually organize it in a way that the can-do mentality comes on top.
And also about this ambition. I mean, this is something that we are observing, and sometimes in energy we push them to dream bigger, in the sense, I mean, just don't be limited to your country, don't be limited to Europe. I mean, we are dealing with global problems, and the world, I mean, is your market. So it is how we can foster this kind of mentality, because it's what you have mentioned. I mean, if you find one of these entrepreneurs in Europe, he's ashamed of having all this kind of ambition and crazy ideas. So what do we need, our society?
Well, I mean, if you look at, you have indeed a big problem, and we will invent a very good, say there's a water problem, and you develop a very good pump. And we then say, well, if you would deploy this pump everywhere, then we would solve the energy problem, and we would solve a water problem and an irrigation problem or whatever problem. But it's in that if where we're not good. Well, how are we going to deploy that thing? And actually, I had this experience, and I don't know how many people here in the room, but I've shared this anecdote before. That I came from a session where all water innovations were presented. Different pumps, different irrigation systems for Africa, for basically solving the problems of the world when it comes to water. And then I was driving back, and somebody called me. So you have to meet this guy. He's an American. He's called Scott Anderson, and he has this charity called On Water as an organization. And I've never heard of him, and I looked him up, and he had, or his organization had put 23,000 pumps in Africa, and provided 7 million people with fresh water. So, and then I thought, God, I was talking to all these people with pumps, and they were all thinking about how do I get my prototype to be adopted by, I don't know, the UNHCR or by the Red Cross or by some development agency, who's going to then pay for it. Nobody thought about the business model of how to get as many people water or irrigation. That is important. The pump, nobody cares about the pump. So I talked to Scott and said, well, what? So first he said, well, he told his story how he came to this, because he actually had a completely different life. He lived in pubs, and he basically was misspending his life, in his view, and now he wanted to do something else. So he said, and he went to Liberia, and saw that many people had all kinds of diseases related to fresh water. He said, well, why isn't anybody solving this problem? So, and he said, the problem that I needed to solve was actually, how do people trust an NGO? So it's not about the water, it's not about the pump, and not about these things. The pump had to be as simple as possible, because it had to be repaired in Africa and produced in Africa, so you create jobs, and there's maintenance to be done there, so nothing complicated. He did need data, because he needed to tell to his people that were doing the whole crowdfunding campaign that the money was well spent. So he had on the pumps a sensor to show if it was actually breaking down or not, so that he didn't have stranded assets. So there was a lot of data involved. But he needed to convey to the people that were paying for all of this that he was actually spending their money well. That was his biggest innovation. And for the rest, it was just getting pumps there and getting people to use them and making sure that there was an infrastructure of maintenance. But he didn't have to build it because it was already there, because he kept it simple. That made me think. So the purpose is to get water to the people, and it's not about the pump. And we tend to want to solve the pump problem. And this is with irrigation. Just look at the wealth of our innovations that were presented at conferences, at experts. You find people that will solve the pump issue miraculously. Membranes, nanotechnology, drones, they do all these wonderful things. But are they delivering the impact at scale, which is really what we need to aim for? And I think that some of those American entrepreneurs that we all look up to actually do that. They understand that they're solving not... Look, Uber didn't solve a taxi problem, but it just got a huge amount of unused assets to increase mobility of people and save us time. That's the problem that they solved. And if they would have thought in the old way, they would have designed a taxi and maybe an electric taxi, and maybe they will get to that, to the self-driving car. But the self-driving car can deliver, an electric self-driving car, indeed, again, a much better value proposition to the end customer and to the environment and to the government that's probably maybe going to pay for these things. So it is about what value do we want to achieve and how to get there, and we need to get better at that.
So focusing on impact. We have talked that the Netherlands is an example in terms of entrepreneurship, but it is also an example in terms of sustainable energy. And I mean, the smart cities concept, for instance, Amsterdam is one of the cities that it is really an example for other cities that they are now trying to move to this smart cities concept. So the sustainable energy situation today, that you know that, for instance, in the European Commission, they are talking about this energy union because they are moving forward. So what do you think about all these initiatives?
For one, I don't think the Netherlands is very good in renewable energies and in production. We have obviously had gas, so we were depending a lot on that, and now we're looking at a kind of a post-gas economy. So we'll see there's a lot of investment and a lot of things going that direction. So you'll see that change. I think what these cities can do is look much more at the demand side and be much smart about how energy is used, about mobility systems, actually connecting your IT and data systems with mobility and with energy and actually creating those collaborations. Typically, they are very different worlds. You've got the energy world, you've got the IT world, and we at the Commission at the time tried to do a private-public partnership around smart cities, and just to connect those worlds was extremely difficult. They were at different parts of their innovation cycles and very hard, very big interests, and cities can actually do that. So that's I think good. I think and this is something which took a long time, because I remember in 2010 already, we saying, well, green is not opposing industry. So, and we always had in the Commission, I would had Mr. Tajani was sitting over there, and then you had Mr. Callas here, and then there was, and it was always, Callas would say something, Tajani would protest. It's incredible. It was always as if there is a zero-sum game between the environment, and we kept saying, no, there is a massive opportunity in creating technologies that are good for the environment, that cut emissions, increase efficiency. And if it's not here, you can export it to China. And why is it that China is now leading? It's because we, where we had everything, dropped the ball because we think we are protecting our traditional industries by avoiding to set certain norms on emission standards or other environmental norms and labeling it as a massive economic opportunity. So we've lost, I think we've lost 10 or maybe 15 years where we were developing technologies in our research programs that just did not make it to the market. Because in our policies, we thought that green was not good for our GDP figures.
Just a question, do you live in a smart house?
I live in an old house, well, not that old, it's 1926. And I actually live in the garage, which is, yes, I prefer the garage than the house, because it's a kind of a concrete structure, and it's someone who built it was working at Shell, so he loved the garage. He had a few cars, and he had a He had his own kind of repair shop, and that kind of is now my house. But they didn't isolate the walls very well, or insulate. So we only have one wall and not a double wall with insulation in between. So we looked at how we could make it energy neutral, and that was not possible. Or we had to change the whole structure of the house, basically add walls, and so we didn't do it. But we are looking at other ways to either generate energy that we've got a flat roof or put some solar panels. But for us, it didn't really add up much, and the cost for water pumps and all these kind of heat pumps we would never basically make it work economically efficiently.
But at least you try. You try to have a zero house emissions, which is something.
I didn't try to have a zero house. Yes, I tried to.
Which is something a bit about the drama that we are looking, for instance, today, many technologies, and then when we go to the real world and to the reality, then we cannot see those technologies already implemented. Okay. And one last question. Do you think that society is changing? And for instance, I have kids, and I use always my kids as a reference. All this about sustainable energy, all this kind of awareness about the impact that we are having. Do you think that it's changing in the society? Because you have also kids. Is their perspective different to yours?
Well, everybody lives in their own kind of echo chambers and information bubbles. I guess our kids also reflect with what they hear. But they tell us often if we're showering too long. You said, and we were, and now it's less. But we lived in Brussels, and they would say gaspillage. Just walk by the shower and just say gaspillage. I said okay, and put the shower off. And but they were much more concerned about that than we were, and so I do think that for them it's much more common to think about sustainability and those kind of things. And my wife does projects with kids and boards, and so they have the boards of companies telling what their main dilemma is, and then these kids actually. Respond to that. I mean, they look, and they are very, very straightforward. They don't take any of the kind of communications, public affairs talk. They basically look right through, and then they very often are extremely sound and about waste, about especially waste. For instance, there was one company, fast-moving consumer good company, and they do a lot in soaps. And the kids say, well, why do you always fill these bottles and you're selling these bottles? And why don't you just have a dispenser and you come and you take your soap? I mean, it's all soap. Who cares? Of course, the company wants to make us believe that every soap is so unique that they put a wonderful bottle around it with a beautiful etiquette, and that it's very different than what their competitor is producing. But for these kids, they say, it's all soap, and I just need to put the soap in the washing machine. So why can't we just go with a dispenser and go? And then they found out that actually that company had developed that, but they didn't introduce it because it's very difficult to put that into a supermarket, and because of all the marketing that goes around this, and that you can't really, a dispenser looks like that it's just a commodity, and they try to make it a brand. So the marketing basically intervened with a common sense that you could lose a lot of waste by just having a dispenser and reusing these bottles. Kids see that.
Yes. These kids, the citizen of the future, they are really much better prepared than us in our mindset. So I think that now we have a bit of time for questions to the audience, or for us from the audience. So yes, thanks for the lights, because otherwise it's difficult to see something from here. Everything is black. There we have a question.
There's a question, yeah. So look, there is a
flying.
no. There's a technique with this.
Yes.
If
sorry
you
about
throw a microphone to someone, first look them in the eye
that. Yes.
and acknowledge that that person knows that you're going to throw it. Because if that doesn't happen, you might actually knock someone out.
Yes. In this case, the throw was a bit short. So okay, Your Highness, I have been reading a few days ago that the new coalition in the Netherlands has agreed to forbid non-electric vehicle or not zero-emission vehicles in Holland. So I would like just to have your comments about this, whether you need new technologies to be able to achieve this, or whether you support this, and whether the public opinion in the Netherlands will support this, and how will the Dutch travel to southern France with their electric vehicles then?
I don't know about the exact ambition that they have. There was already an ambition to not allow new combustion vehicles on the road, I think by 2035 or 2025, I don't know. It's a bit like Norway, but not as ambitious, I think. That's obviously a good point, the international travel. I think governments must do these things to spur innovation. If you look at where many of the innovations in fuel actually were shelved, and many European research programs on hydrogen had taken place, but because there was no real pressure to introduce them in the market, there's not been that real fast acceleration of reduction, for instance, of tank size and those kind of things, and applying new technologies. So I do think, yes, if it's now within the realm of feasibility, if you can actually do that, say 25 or 2030, from there on, no combustion engines anymore, or nothing beyond a certain emission level, I think that will spur innovation, and that would be possible. Obviously, if you see eventually that it's completely not possible, you can always still come up with some kind of transition measure. If you see that in France or in Belgium or somewhere else they're not doing it, and therefore you can't travel with your car, again, you have to kind of find ways around that. But that's not a reason why you wouldn't want to at least have that ambition. And I assume with the current French president that he is also, if he sees an opportunity for French car makers to be just that little bit faster in delivering those kind of cars, that he's quite eager to also follow suit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Now they are trying. they have learned. There is somebody there. It's very difficult. Yes.
Hi. I heard you spend quite a bit of time in the garage. And as we know, a lot of good startups came out of the garages, like IBM or Microsoft or whatever. So are you working on a stealthy startup? Maybe an energy startup?
No. Definitely not on an energy startup. No, I actually, let's say I have my business. I don't call myself an entrepreneur. I call myself a free person. I think that for me is more important. I don't want to build a big business. I actually did look into it. I looked at business models. I looked at what I could scale and what I couldn't scale, and what I really wanted to do. And for what I really wanted to do, I didn't need a business. So that was my decision. So I do some consulting, and that's my business. But I don't want to be a startup and go through all the razzmatazz of getting financing and growing it 100% every month. That's with all the HR nightmares and all that. So no.
Great. Other question there?
Yeah, Your Highness, you talked about the US being kind of fostering craziness. What would you say is craziness in the energy field, that, or if you have a couple of ideas in the energy field, if not in any other field that we could endeavor in? Thanks.
Well, that statement about fostering craziness in the US could be interpreted in many different ways. But I wouldn't say that the Americans foster craziness. They suffer it as well. So I think what they do, it is that you are allowed to think big. but it's not crazy. You know, you have to have a good idea of how you get there. And we sometimes only get part of that message. We think, okay, we have to think big. So world domination. Yes, but then an investor will want to know how you get to that world domination. If then there's a big question mark, obviously that's not going to happen. I think in energy, many of the really crazy things have already been developed, and the craziness comes in actually applying it. And so there was this, for me, a brilliant company called Better Place, and this Israeli company. I think $1 billion was spent, and it went broke. For replacing battery packs in cars, so you didn't have the problem with loading. You could basically just click in a new battery pack, and but it required the whole, or at least the biggest car manufacturers to design the cars that way. And even though they use open standards, then some part of that industry didn't want to play ball. And then you of course have to have a whole infrastructure with loading stations, and that could still be done. But you see that it becomes very complicated. But it was already designed, and maybe you need kind of you build on the graveyard of these kind of failed projects to finally come to something where the industry at least now acknowledges that yes, and it took a while, electricity, and it took Mr. Musk to get us all convinced, but electricity is now going to probably be the main source of energy for motor vehicles, and we're still talking about hydrogen and how that's going to work. So I think all of those technologies are there, and the craziness really comes in how do you dare to go for something big like Better Place and maybe fail, or like Tesla, because there are all these kind of network complications. If you don't have your infrastructure, you do not, for instance, as you were mentioning, you could do it in the Netherlands, but you know, what happens if you don't have the infrastructure in France? Common standards, all of those things. So we have this company in the Netherlands, or it's actually, well, it's a pure startup, and it's even before even product development. It's called Hard Hyperloop. They jumped on the opportunity that Elon Musk created with the SpaceX prize to develop a pod to go through this loop. It's a vacuum tube basically, and you can travel at really high speeds. And obviously the challenge is how you can travel at high speeds and also, but still branch off, because you could go, you know, if you can go very fast from Rome to Copenhagen, that is fine, but it'd be much nicer if you can go fast and stop by the way, because then you get much more flexibility in your transport system. And that's what you want. You want to create mobility and choice for travelers. And this company has gone quite far in this, but you know, they have no market yet. It depends very much on governments. Where are we actually going to build that infrastructure? So and then they are developing this pod already. So basically you have a bus, but you don't have a road yet, and you don't even know how people are going to board this thing. Is this going to happen in a station? Is it going to happen in dedicated infrastructure? Oh, but still they're developing it, and they might find that their innovation is part of the brake system and is not the pod itself. And that's, I like these guys because they know all this. They know that the chances of their success are really slim. But we also know that there's a considerable chance that we're going to have that kind of infrastructures. So you have to have people that push those boundaries. And are they crazy? I don't know. It depends on how much you get financially exposed. Maybe sometimes the investors are more crazy. But we need more crazy investors. We need governments to actually support those investments, even if they sometimes fail. But you're betting on the future, and if we would have such a transportation system, I think we would be better off.
Yes. Well, one question, because indeed one of the challenges that we have is the scale up. I mean, sometimes the start is easy, but then the scale up of our companies is complicated. And one of the aspects that we say is that this kind of collaboration between the big corporations, the incumbents, and the small startups, the more flexible startups, it could be beneficial for those, and at the same time to help the startups to scale up. You have experience in both worlds. I mean, you know both worlds. So which are the challenges? Because everybody's happy to collaborate, but when it comes, it is really very, very complicated.
Yeah, I've seen a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about this, and they are mutually complementary, you'd say. Speed and flexibility, innovation on one hand, and processes and optimization and market size, all of that, capital on the other side. I think we looked into this, and actually a set of companies on leadership of the KPN actually developed a tool to see if companies are ready for working with startups. And there's also the flip side is, are startups ready to work with corporates? So there's things you need to do within the corporate, within your organization, to make sure that you can actually work with startups. So, but that doesn't have to come in the way. I think the most important thing is that you know what you want. So from the startup, know what you want and be prepared, you know, also to go away and not, because it might be that the corporate asks things from you that you cannot deliver or don't want to deliver. But also means if you work with a corporate, that you have to co-create. It's not, you cannot just go in there and say, I'm this brilliant startup, I've got this brilliant idea, now this is it, this is the only thing. No, you go in and you have to have a co-creation mindset, because it might be that the corporate needs something else, but is very close to what you can deliver, but you need to tweak it or pivot a bit. And so I think the startup needs to know really well what it wants to get out of it, and the corporate needs to know. And I think with many of these also corporate venture schemes, there's not, I don't think the corporate know exactly why they do this. Sometimes it's marketing, to be seen as we are cool and we're pro startups, or it's exploring the market, to have a window on all these innovations that are happening. But even then you need to know, well, when the window is open, you know, and you see an innovation, what are you going to do? Are you going to purchase this? Is it an acquisition? Is it an acqui-hire? Is it, and if you do that, how are you going to integrate it in your company? Are you going to leave it on the edge? Are you going to develop an edge and you acquire more companies? Are you going to actually bring it into your company and strip it apart? Or you think you can hold it as a unit? So those questions often are not answered yet. And then you go into this interaction and a lot of things happen because the KPIs are not well aligned and your middle management doesn't know what to do with this startup. And they might actually compete with your running business. You know, all of these questions then need to be addressed. And I think companies should maybe experiment with that, but also should learn from each other, because I think there's already quite a lot of literature about it, and there are quite some companies that have done really well. We should consider that Android was a startup that was bought by Google. Within 2 years, they were a dominant market player, or at least a majority market player. So there are companies that are actually capable of doing this. And so it might be difficult, it might be complicated, but it can be done.
It's possible.
It's possible.
So, His Royal Highness, thanks a lot for being here. Thanks a lot for joining us in this event. We are going to be inspired with many things that you have said, and it has been a great honor for us to have you here. Thank you.